Tournament seasons are a wonderful thing where you have this huge block in a year where you're dedicating all your time to play as competitively as possible, and if you are a competitive player, and try to make it to the top and earn yourself whatever reward it may be, right? For some card games, it is just a monetary reward or, getting points towards something bigger. And for a lot of games, it is getting that World Championship qualification, because by getting to the World Championship, you can prove to be the #1 in the world and win Worlds and become the best in the whole game. That's kind of the big goal for a lot of players, right? For a lot of other players, is just playing with friends or, maybe, just winning a regional. Some people just want to make it into top 8 of a regional, and that's where their goals end. But regardless of what your goal is, whether it's winning Worlds or getting a top 8 at your, inside of your region, there is a step that everyone has to go through, and that is choosing your deck. And now, deck choice, I could be making videos about deck choice for just Vanguard's own formats and Vanguard's own tournament structure in their own videos, because your deck choice in a team tournament is going to be very different from your deck choice in a solo tournament, because a team tournament has to think about the 3v3, and also if you're playing Japanese or English format, whether there is diversity cut or not, etc, etc. So that would be a huge video just for, its own thing. But I want to really get down to basics in this video and talk about deck choice in a tournament just on a very broad level. And if you guys want a more in-depth discussion on this, talking about specifically in team formats, maybe we'll do that closer to Springfest next year, so it's more applicable to the English player base. And if you want a more specific one, on what to bring in this specific format, you can let me know in the comments below. And before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, make sure to check that you're subscribed to the channel, because, we're trying to aim for that 100K. I'm starting to feel the limits of reaching 100K as just a Vanguard YouTuber, and I feel like the need to, branch out to other TCGs. But at the same time, if you want to support the channel and, get a little bit of extra content and get some extra little, extra little bit of community bonus time, you can become a YouTube channel member. It helps support the channel, and I upload exclusive content, and we have a huge section in the Discord as well for channel members that you can join too, and join exclusive remote online tournaments and just improve as a player as well if that is your goal. But getting into the video, today we're going to talk about choosing a deck, and I think that it really comes down to several factors. Of course, there is a reason why. I think that there's one side of the discussion is that a lot of people will say if you're really planning to play and win an event, you might as well just play the best deck in the format. And why do people say to play the best deck in the format? It's not actually just because it is the best deck, believe it or not, right? It's easy to think it's like, oh, let's say, every single top player puts out a tier list and says, let's say, for example, Gendiva is the best deck. Or, in Pokemon, let's say, says that Gardevoir is the best deck. Or in Shadowverse Evolve says that, mid-range sword from set 2 onwards is the best deck, right? So you basically have this thing where everybody, let's say the community, tells you this one deck is the best, and therefore the logical conclusion is it is rated as the best, therefore take it to tournament. That's technically not why. The reason why I think it is, recommended to take the best deck to a tournament is because that deck has the highest amount of information and resources available to the average player. Because a deck that is explored by all the top players and top content creators and has a lot of data, information, previous tournament reports, you look at VG Paradox, you can look at one of the top decks and see all of the ratios of cards being played in the deck throughout tournament seasons, and that way you have access to the highest amount of information, you have access to the highest amount of data that will inform your plays and inform your decision to perform with that deck. Now at the same time, that also invites the same kind of counter argument that that deck has the highest amount of information, therefore players have the highest amount of time to prep for it. So I think that choosing a deck for a tournament oftentimes comes down to there's two choices, I would say. Either you're playing one of the best decks because it has the highest amount of data and information. People write guides in certain TCG communities that literally walk you through every single card choice and why it's played, with a whole logical reasoning on why it is there, and play patterns combos, mulligans. You can find out everything about a popular deck just online. Whereas a more rogue deck, or something that just released, let's say, like a new set comes out 2 weeks ago, it's the first event where it's legal, and there's a new deck around the block, and you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to play this new deck because people are going to be unprepared for it. But while that is somewhat true, people that have been putting in crazy amounts of time into a specific deck, they will only basically, they will know how their deck works so well that they'll be able to kind of just like pick up on what you're doing as you go along as well, and not necessarily focus on, when you're playing a new deck in a tournament, you are focusing on not just what your opponent's doing to be able to beat them, but it's also like this deck is so new, you are discovering things mid-tournament. And that's not necessarily what you want to be doing in a major tournament that much, right? You want to already know everything about your deck so that your decisions are as informed by past experiences and data collection as possible, so that you can focus entirely on what your opponent is doing, and even if it's a new deck, you don't have to distract yourself with what you have to think about your plays. Your plays come to you by default. You already know everything that you have to do because they're informed by data and past practice. Whereas if you bring a brand new deck, you are focusing on learning what your deck wants to do while also putting in the time and energy to know what your opponent is doing to beat them. And so therefore your time in your brain basically is split mid-match, and you're on a timer, right? 25 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever the round timer is, to work all of this out. So I think that, generally speaking, bringing like a brand new deck, unless you've been like play testing with proxies like crazy, is usually not so much to play, and it's a lot more typical to bring the best deck. But now if you don't want to bring the best deck, and let's say you have two other branches, I would say. One is oftentimes you'll have a best deck, and then that best deck will, if the card game developers, the developing team, the R&D team of that card game knows what they're doing, they will often make cards or even decks that completely counter that deck. So we've seen in the Pokemon TCG recently, they've been introducing these like anti-best deck cards, right? We'll have cards that, they introduced this new Jirachi that beats the best deck in the format, and they keep printing these hate cards for the top deck because they want to kind of, try to put that deck down and like, diversify the meta or whatever, right? Whereas in Vanguard, it's a little bit less obvious, but, I think people are picking up now on the fact that while Gendiva is sort of at the top, a lot of these decks like Stoicheia that have super fast early game due to a lot of them being able to use like token-based engines, or Zorga that has like, just roaming prison dragons that just pop out and rush your opponent nice and early from turn 2 onwards, you have a lot of these like Stoicheia decks that have been like basically just sweeping Gendivas left and right, and that kind of shows up as this counter deck, where it's not necessarily an obvious counter. It doesn't say if your opponent's Vanguard is Gendiva, deal an extra damage or anything like that, but it does, in game plan wise, beat what Gendiva is trying to do. And I think that that is also a very, easy pick for a tournament as well, because those decks usually will be around for quite some time. You'll have time to practice with them, and because playing the best deck means that you're playing against people that have prepared an insane amount of time for the format, it means that it is harder to win by that same extent because people have practiced so much against that deck that they will be bringing all kinds of counters. So you have to always be aware of those counters at the same time. So there's this like interesting kind of like dichotomy in that aspect, right? And then there comes this argument of, well, what if I don't enjoy playing the best deck? Or like sometimes there will be a best deck in the meta, and I'm sure chat right now watching this too, there's some of you that might agree. You'll have a best deck in the format. Like let's say right now for Vanguard it's Gendiva, or in Pokemon it's Gardevoir. And you will try to learn that deck and play it because you're like, well, I might as well, there's so much resources information there. I have access to all these guides and deck profiles and like other sources of info. But no matter how much I play this deck, which is supposed to be the best and win games the easiest, I just can't seem to do it. It just doesn't fit me, right? Sometimes, it's like there's in different sports, there's a reason why there's different, obviously in basketball, you'll have, the ball is the same for all players, but the shoes they wear or the equipment they have, in other sports will be different because it needs to fit them as players, it needs to fit their grip. It needs to fit their build and their physique. And, it's like you have to kind of make sure that you are performing the best with the equipment. So in TCG terms, the deck of choice that you have, right? So sometimes to bring out your optimal ability to perform, sometimes playing the best deck doesn't match that. You know, the kind of objectively best deck might not fit you. You'd have to put in so much more effort to perform with it, because you might have to just unlearn something that you normally do that doesn't fit that deck, right? And so sometimes it is simply that you have to play something different, right? Maybe there's a tier 2 deck that fits you super well, and your win rate with that tier 2 deck is miles above that of your win rate with the tier 1 deck. And so I think that that's kind of like where that decision kind of comes into play, where it's like, do you play the arguably tier 1 deck that has the most information about it, or do you play something that is a bit lower, also has a lot of information about it so you can improve with it and grow with it, but it fits you a lot better so your win rate is higher too? So I think the TLDR of this video is, when choosing a deck for a tournament in a very broad term, I think you just kind of have to really think about these 3 factors, right? What is the best deck in the format? And then immediately ask, what are the decks that beat it, and how like nigh impossible are those matchups? You know, if they're complete counters, it's like, well, maybe we should be playing that counter instead then. And then there's also like kind of 4D chess happening here, where it's like, okay, if this is the best deck and this is the counter, and then this is the counter to this counter, can I counter this? And like, you know, it gets a bit more complicated. But I think the 3 factors are, you find out what the best deck is and see how well you perform with it, and then you analyze what the counters are and how well you can deal with those counters while playing the best deck. And maybe if playing the counter yourself, if you expect this deck to be the most popular, maybe playing that counter yourself will raise your chances. And then it is, okay, let's say those don't work for me. How well can I perform with that like pet deck that I have, right? So for example, for me in Vanguard terms, that would be Ava right now. And while it is my pet deck, as my favorite, it just doesn't work in this current format. The format is just too fast. Ava doesn't have enough breathing room to actually perform and just kind of dies before it gets to set up, and therefore it just can't perform. And so therefore I have to relegate the deck choice and try to find other solutions, right? And that's just kind of how playing competitive card games is going to be. And so I think, you know, ask those questions to yourself and think about it, right? How much can you maximize your own potential with your deck choice, and really think about, you know, what fits you, and also what will bring about your highest chance of winning as well. So hope this video has been clear enough. I feel like I've been kind of jumping around a little bit here and there. I film a lot of these unscripted and just kind of spitball ideas from my head, but hopefully it was useful to you. If you liked the video, please give it a like, and once again, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel as well. But otherwise, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.